There is a man in Kanazawa who, every evening at exactly 9:15, does one small thing before he allows himself to sit down for the night. He walks to the narrow entryway of his apartment, kneels for a moment, and straightens the 2 pairs of shoes resting there so that they face the door, ready to be stepped into. Then he takes a folded cloth from a hook on the wall, wipes down the small step beneath them, hangs the cloth back exactly where it was, and stands up. The entire ritual takes him under 20 seconds. He is 72 years old. He has done this every single night for more than 30 years. His home has never once been what most of us would call messy. Not the kind of messy that swallows a Saturday. Not the kind that makes you dread having guests over. And if you asked him why he does it, he would look at you with genuine confusion because, to him, it isn't a habit, or a technique, or a system. It's simply what a person does at the end of a day. It's as automatic to him as breathing, and about as noticeable. And somewhere else in the world right now, someone is stepping over a pile of shoes at their own front door for the 3rd day in a row. They're telling themselves they'll deal with it this weekend. They feel a small, familiar flicker of guilt every time they walk past it, a tiny weight that lands and then disappears before they can even name it. Their home isn't dirty exactly. It isn't a disaster. But it never quite feels calm. It never feels finished. There's always a low hum of things half done, a sense that they're perpetually one step behind their own life, and they can't quite figure out why, no matter how hard they try or how many weekends they sacrifice to catching up. What if I told you that the difference between these two people has almost nothing to do with free time, nothing to do with natural tidiness or discipline, or how big their homes are, or how much money either of them has? What if the real difference came down to something so small, so quiet, and so easy to overlook that most people go their entire lives without ever noticing it? Because here's the truth that Japan seems to understand on a cultural level, and that so much of the rest of the world has somehow missed entirely. A better life is not built through enormous dramatic change. It is not built by overhauling everything at once, by white-knuckling your way through a new routine for 2 weeks before it collapses. It is built through habits so small they barely register as effort. Habits repeated so consistently over so much time that they quietly reshape not just your home, but your health, your mind, and the entire direction of your days. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 8 of these habits completely. You'll understand not just what they are, but the actual mechanism underneath each one. Why it works on a level that most self-improvement advice never even touches. And more importantly, you'll know exactly which one you can begin tonight, before you go to bed, with no preparation and no cost. I want you to stay with me all the way to number 6, because number 6 is the one almost nobody expects. It has nothing to do with cleaning, nothing to do with waking up early, and nothing to do with any productivity trick you've probably already tried and abandoned. It's the one that people tell me changed the way they handle their worst days. But it only makes sense once you've understood the 7 around it. So let's build to it properly. Before we get to the habits themselves, we need to take apart one belief that almost all of us carry around, without ever questioning it. And once you see it clearly, everything else in this video falls into place. The belief we never question. Here is the belief. Most of us, somewhere deep down, believe that a good life is the result of big moments. The dramatic decision, the complete transformation, the Monday morning where we finally wake up at 5, throw out all the junk food, join the gym, start the meditation practice, and become an entirely new person overnight. We've been sold this idea our whole lives. Every advertisement, every before and after, every motivational post tells us the same thing. Change should be big, fast, and total. And so we try. We go all in. And for a few days, sometimes even a few weeks, it works. And then, almost without exception, it collapses. The gym membership goes unused. The routine falls apart. The junk food comes back. And we're left feeling like the failure is ours, like we simply didn't want it badly enough, weren't disciplined enough, weren't strong enough. But the failure was never yours. The failure was in the model itself. Because a life that is built in one dramatic burst is a life with no foundation. It has nothing to stand on when motivation fades. And motivation always fades. It is not a renewable resource. Japan offers a completely different model, and it's a model that has quietly produced some of the healthiest, longest living, most orderly communities on Earth. The idea is this: you don't change your life by changing everything. You change it by changing one small thing, so small it's almost impossible to fail at, and then letting time do the work that willpower never could. The 8 habits we're about to go through are exactly this. Each one is almost absurdly small on its own. A wiped counter, a pause before a second helping, a moment at the front door. But layered together, repeated daily, given the compounding power of years, they don't just clean a home, they change a person. Let's begin with the first one, because it happens before you've even fully stepped inside. Number 1, Genkin. Drawing the line at the door. In every Japanese home, no matter how small, there is a space just inside the front door, called the Genkin. It's usually a step lower than the rest of the house, a small threshold where outdoor shoes come off and indoor life begins. And in Japanese culture, this is not a polite suggestion or an occasional preference. It is closer to a law of physics. Shoes come off at the Genkan always. It is one of the deepest, most universally followed customs in the entire country. Now, a lot of people hear this and think, sure, taking your shoes off keeps the floor cleaner. And that's true, but it's the shallowest part of the truth. Let me give you the full picture, because the mechanism here is more powerful than most people realize. Think about everywhere your shoes go in a single day: the sidewalk, a parking lot, the floor of a public restroom, a gas station. Researchers who have studied household contamination have found that the soles of shoes can carry hundreds of thousands of units of bacteria, along with traces of chemicals, pollen, and outdoor allergens picked up from every surface you've crossed. And in most homes around the world, people walk all of that straight across the kitchen floor, into the living room, over the carpet where children play on their hands and knees, where the dog sleeps, where people sometimes sit. Your floor is not a neutral surface. It's a living space. Everything that gets deposited on it doesn't just sit there quietly. It gets stirred into the air you breathe. It gets ground into carpet fibers. It gets trapped onto furniture. A home where shoes never come inside isn't cleaner because someone is scrubbing more. It's cleaner because less is arriving in the first place. That is the entire Japanese approach to cleanliness, in a single idea. Prevention over correction. You don't fight the mess after it enters. You stop it at the door. But here's the second layer, the one that has nothing to do with hygiene at all. And it's the part that makes the Genken genuinely transformative. Removing your shoes is also a psychological transition. Imagine someone coming home after a brutal day. The crowded train, the traffic, the endless meetings, the notifications that would not stop. They reach their front door and the first thing they do is stop and take off their shoes. In that small pause, something happens. The body registers a shift. The outside world, with all its stress and noise, stays on the other side of that line. And the day's weight begins, just slightly, to lift from the shoulders. This is why walking into a Japanese home so often carries a distinct feeling of calm. It isn't only that the floors are clean. It's that the entryway itself is a boundary, a place where the outside is asked to wait, so that the inside can be something separate and protected. You don't need to renovate your home to borrow this. You need a small shoe rack right by the door, a stool or bench so it's easy to sit and remove your shoes, and a basket of comfortable indoor slippers, positioned so obviously that taking your shoes off feels like the natural, easy thing to do, not a rule you have to force yourself to remember. Make it visual. Make it effortless. And here's the key most people miss. The habit only sticks when the system removes the friction. If there's nowhere to put the shoes, people keep them on. If there's a beautiful, obvious place, people use it without thinking. The shift is this. The shoes come off at the door not because Japan is fussy, but because Japan is precise about where the outside world ends and where your sanctuary begins. That's number 1. Number 2, Kaizen. The 2-minute rule that ends cleaning days forever. Let me describe a cycle that will probably feel painfully familiar. All week long, small tasks get postponed. A dish left in the sink, a counter wiped down later. A pile of mail set on the table to deal with another time. None of it feels urgent in the moment. Each individual thing is genuinely tiny, but they accumulate silently, all week. And then Saturday arrives, and suddenly you're facing not a series of 2-minute tasks, but one enormous, exhausting project that eats 4, 5, 6 hours of your only day off. You clean hard. You feel wrecked afterward. The house looks great for about 2 days. And then, by Thursday, it's slipping again, and the whole miserable cycle resets. Japanese homemakers, for generations, have broken this cycle, using a concept that has since become world famous in an entirely different context. The concept is Kaizen. It's often talked about as a business philosophy. Toyota built a global empire on it, but at its root, Kaizen is much simpler and much older than any factory. It means continuous improvement through small, almost invisible steps, not the huge leap, the tiny, constant daily adjustment. Applied to a home, Kaizen becomes one clean rule that changes everything. If a task takes 2 minutes or less, you do it the moment you notice it. Not later. Not on a list. Now. Wipe the stovetop right after you cook. 2 minutes. Rinse the cup the second you finish your coffee, instead of setting it down. 30 seconds. Wipe the bathroom sink after you brush your teeth, while the toothpaste and water splashes are still fresh. 1 minute. Fold the blanket on the couch before you leave the room. A few seconds. None of these things feel like cleaning. And that precisely is the genius of it. They're too small to dread, too quick to postpone, too minor to trigger the resistance that a big cleaning session always does. But look at what they prevent. That 2-minute stovetop wipe, skipped for a week, becomes a 30-minute scrubbing job as the grease hardens and bakes on with each new use. That sink left for days becomes a project with its own supplies and its own dedicated time slot. Every single one of these tiny actions is quietly standing guard against a much larger, much more painful task, waiting somewhere in your future. You are not really wiping a counter. You are canceling a future Saturday. And there's something deeper happening here. Something that almost nobody talks about. A counter that gets wiped the moment it's dirty never has the chance to feel like a mess. There's no accumulation to feel guilty about, no growing pile you keep avoiding looking at, no low hum of unfinished business following you around your own home. The space simply stays the way it was, and so does your mind. The shift is this: small and immediate always beats big and postponed. You are not too lazy to keep a clean home. You've just been taught the wrong model, the exhausting event instead of the effortless habit. That's number 2. Number 3. Hara Hachibu, the ancient art of stopping at 80%. Now we move from the home to the body, and to one of the simplest ideas on this entire list, an idea that may partly explain why one region of Japan produces more healthy 100-year-olds than almost anywhere on Earth. On the island of Okinawa, there is a phrase people have quietly said to themselves before meals for centuries: Hara Hachibu. It translates roughly, to eat until you are 80% full. Not until you're stuffed. Not until you physically cannot take another bite. Until you are about 80% of the way there. And then you stop. To most of us, this sounds almost impossible, and maybe even a little sad. We've been trained our entire lives to eat until we're completely full, and often well past it, until we're heavy, sluggish, and reaching for the waistband of our pants. We eat quickly, distracted, watching something, scrolling something, and by the time our body realizes it's had enough, we've already had far too much. Here's the mechanism, and it's beautifully simple. There is a delay, roughly 20 minutes, between the moment your stomach is actually full and the moment your brain receives the signal that it's full. That gap is where overeating lives. If you eat fast, you can pack in a huge amount of food in that 20-minute window before your brain ever gets the message to stop. But if you eat slowly, deliberately actually tasting your food, and you pause partway through to ask yourself a single honest question: am I still genuinely hungry, or am I just still eating? You give that signal time to catch up. You stop at 80%, and 20 minutes later you discover that 80% was, in fact, exactly enough. The Okinawans didn't arrive at this through nutritional science. They arrived at it through culture, through the simple discipline of the pause. But the results are visible in the data. Lower rates of obesity, longer lives, better digestion, and bodies that aren't constantly under the strain of processing more than they need. You don't have to measure anything or count anything to begin. You just have to slow down and insert one small pause in the middle of your meal. That pause is the entire practice. In a world that tells you the answer is always a new diet, a new plan, a new restriction, Harahachi-bu offers something quieter and far more sustainable. Not a rule about what to eat, but a moment of attention about when to stop. The shift is this. The pause matters more than the portion. That's number 3. Number 4. Ikigai. The reason you open your eyes in the morning. Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it honestly for a moment. If tomorrow you had nowhere you had to be, no job to report to, no alarm, no obligation pulling you out of bed, what would actually get you up? What would you rise for, if nothing forced you to? For a lot of people, that question is genuinely difficult to answer, and that difficulty is worth paying attention to. In Japan, there's a concept for the answer to that question. It's called ikigai, and it translates to something like a reason for being, the thing that gives your life meaning, direction, and the quiet pull to keep going. And here's where it stops being philosophy and starts being something measurable. In Okinawa, that same region famous for its extraordinary number of healthy elders, researchers studying longevity kept running into ikigai again and again. It wasn't just the diet keeping these people alive and sharp into their 90s and beyond. It was that nearly every one of them had a clear, specific reason to wake up in the morning. And crucially, it was almost never something grand. It wasn't a mission to change the world. It was a garden that needed tending, a grandchild to teach, a craft to practice, a community role, a friend to check on, a small daily purpose that belonged to them and them alone. Their lives weren't just about surviving, about filling time until the end. They were oriented around something. They were pointed somewhere. This matters more than we tend to admit. Purpose isn't just a nice feeling. It measurably affects how your body handles stress, how deeply you sleep, how much resilience you can summon on a hard day, and even, according to the longevity research, how long you live. A person with a reason to get up moves through the world differently than a person who is simply getting through it. You can see it in their posture, their energy, the way time seems to move for them. So here is the small action buried inside this enormous idea. You don't need to discover your grand life purpose this afternoon. You just need to notice one thing. What is the activity that makes you lose all track of time? The thing you look up from and realize an hour has vanished? Very often, the seed of a real ikigai is hiding right there, in that single question. And protecting that thing, giving it a small, deliberate place in your days, is where a more meaningful life quietly begins. The shift is this. Find the one thing that makes you forget the clock and guard it like it matters, because it does. That's number 4. Number 5, wabi-sabi, finding beauty in what is imperfect. Look around wherever you are right now and find something old. A worn wooden table with rings and scratches. A mug with a chip in the handle that you still reach for anyway. A book with a cracked spine and softened corners. Now notice the quiet instinct you might feel toward those things. The small voice that says they're flawed, that they should be replaced, that a better version would be cleaner, newer, more perfect. That voice is loud in the modern world. Everything around us insists on perfection. Every image is filtered, every surface is flawless, every life presented online looks seamless and complete. And so we absorb, without ever agreeing to it, the exhausting belief that anything less than perfect is a failure, including ourselves. Japan has an old philosophy that says the exact opposite, and it's one of the most quietly liberating ideas you'll ever encounter. It's called wabi-sabi, and at its heart is the understanding that nothing is permanent, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect, and that this is not a tragedy. It's where the beauty actually lives. A cracked bowl that's been repaired, a face lined with the evidence of decades of expression, a garden that changes and fades with the seasons. In the wabi-sabi view, these aren't flaws to be corrected or hidden. They're stories. They're proof of a life that was actually lived. actually used, actually loved. The ware on that table is a record of every meal served on it. The lines on a face are a map of everything that person has felt. And this idea reaches far past objects. It reaches straight into the way you look at your own life. Because if you can accept that a chipped bowl is beautiful, maybe you can begin to accept that a life that hasn't gone perfectly is not a failed life. That you don't have to be flawless to be worthy. That the pursuit of perfect, that endless, grinding race to fix and improve and optimize every single thing, is not actually taking you toward peace. It's taking you away from it. Wabi Sabi invites you to step out of that race, to accept yourself and your life as they actually are, in this moment, and to shift your focus away from some impossible finished perfection and towards something far kinder, your own quiet, ongoing progress. The shift is this: stop chasing perfect and start noticing what's already beautiful in the imperfect. That's number 5. Number 6. Gaman, the quiet strength almost nobody expects. Here it is. The one I promised you. The one that has nothing to do with cleaning, or waking up early, or any technique you've tried before. And I saved it for exactly this spot, because it only makes real sense once you've understood everything around it. Life is going to be hard sometimes. That isn't pessimism, it's simply true. Everyone, without exception, faces difficulty. Loss, setback, disappointment, the days when everything seems to go wrong at once. The difference between people is almost never whether hardship arrives. It's what they do in the moment it does. In Japan, there's a concept for this, and it runs deep through the entire culture. It's called Geiman, and it means enduring difficult situations with patience and quiet dignity. Facing what's hard without collapsing into panic, without dissolving into constant complaint, without letting the difficulty take over completely. Now, I want to be very careful here, because Gaman is easy to misunderstand, and the misunderstanding is dangerous. Gaman does not mean suppressing your emotions. It does not mean pretending you feel nothing, bottling everything up, or refusing to acknowledge pain. That isn't strength. That's a wound waiting to happen. Gaman means something more subtle and more powerful than that. It means feeling the difficulty fully and refusing to let it become your entire identity. It means that in the hardest moment, you don't let the pain be the thing that drives every decision you make next. Think about what actually happens when something goes wrong. There's the event itself, and then there's the space right after it. That tiny window before you react. Most of us fill that window with panic or spiraling, or the reflex to complain and catastrophize. Geiman is the practice of using that window differently, of pausing, breathing, keeping your footing, and choosing the next right action instead of being swept away by the emotion of the moment. It's the difference between a wave knocking you off your feet and a wave you brace for and stand through. And here's why this is the quiet foundation beneath a genuinely strong life. Everything else can be going well. Clean home, good habits, sense of purpose. But life will still test you, without warning, and often at the worst possible time. Geiman is what holds when everything else is shaking. It's not loud. It doesn't look impressive from the outside. It's a person quietly deciding, in the middle of something painful, that they will meet it with dignity and take the next step anyway. That is real mental strength, and it can be practiced, built, and strengthened like any other muscle, one hard moment at a time. The shift is this: you cannot control whether hard things happen to you. You can control whether you let them define you. That's number 6. Number 7, omatanashi, care when no one is watching. There's a quiet habit that sits underneath almost everything else on this list, and it may be the one that reveals the most about a person's character. It's called omatanashi, and it means caring for the comfort and well-being of others, deeply, genuinely, and without expecting a single thing in return. No thanks, no recognition, no reward, just care, offered freely. You can see omatanashi everywhere in Japan, once you know to look for it. And it's often what visitors find most striking about the country. People keep public spaces spotless not because anyone is enforcing it, but because someone else will use that space after them. They lower their voices on trains, out of consideration for strangers they'll never meet. They line up with patience. They leave places a little better than they found them. And they do all of this quietly as a default, without applause, because it doesn't occur to them to do otherwise. Underneath it is a simple but profound belief that even your smallest action has an effect on the people around you. The way you leave a shared space, the volume of your voice, the small courtesies you extend or withhold, none of it happens in a vacuum. All of it ripples outward and touches others. And so the practice of omotenashi is really the practice of moving through the world as though other people matter all the time, whether or not anyone is keeping score. Here's the part that transforms this from mere etiquette into something that changes you from the inside. The habit of caring for others without reward doesn't just improve the world around you. It reshapes who you are. Because when you practice consideration in the small invisible moments, the moments where no one would ever know if you didn't bother, you're building an identity. You're becoming a person who is thoughtful by default, generous by reflex, aware of others as a matter of habit rather than performance. And a person built that way carries a kind of quiet dignity that no amount of recognition seeking can ever produce. Imagine, just for a moment, if everyone practiced even a small piece of this. If everyone left every space they touched a little better than they found it. The cumulative effect would be enormous, and it starts with one person deciding that care given in private still counts. The shift is this. The smallest, most invisible act of consideration is still an act of consideration, and it changes you most of all. That's number 7. Number 8, kintsugi. Broken, and more beautiful for it. We come now to the final habit, and it might be the most beautiful of all. It begins with a broken bowl. In most of the world, when a piece of pottery cracks or shatters, we throw it away. It's broken, and broken means finished, means worthless, means gone. But in Japan, there is a centuries-old art that treats a broken object in a completely different way. It's called kintsugi. When a cherished piece of pottery breaks, instead of discarding it or trying to hide the damage, the pieces are carefully rejoined, and the cracks are filled with real gold. The repair is not disguised, it's illuminated. The gold traces every fracture, making the broken lines the most visible, most striking, most beautiful part of the entire object. The bowl doesn't become less valuable for having broken. It becomes more valuable, because now it carries a story of survival, rendered in gold. Sit with how radical that idea actually is. The break isn't hidden, it's honored. It's turned into the very thing that makes the object precious. Now think about how most of us treat our own breaks. Our failures, we bury. Our mistakes, we hope no one remembers. The scars from the hardest chapters of our lives, the losses, the humiliations, the times things fell completely apart. We spend enormous energy hiding, ashamed, as though they were evidence that something is wrong with us. Kintsugi asks a completely different question. What if the thing that broke you is not your shame, but your gold? What if your cracks are not proof of weakness, but proof of exactly the opposite? Proof that you were tested, that you fell, and that you found a way to put yourself back together and keep going. Because here is a truth worth remembering. A person who has never broken has also never had to learn how to rebuild. A person who has never fallen has never discovered that they can rise. The people who are strongest on the inside are almost never the ones who had easy, unbroken lives. They're the ones who came apart at some point and then reassembled themselves, and are quietly, permanently stronger at every place the break once was. Your history of failing and recovering isn't a record of your weakness. It's the clearest evidence you have of your resilience. It's the gold running through you. The shift is this. You don't need to hide what broke you. You need to see it for what it really is. Proof of everything you survived. That's number 8. So let's gather all 8 into one breath, because seeing them together is where the real picture emerges. Genken, the line at the door that keeps the outside world outside and lets your home be a sanctuary. Kaizen, the 2-minute rule that means the mess never gets a chance to grow, and the exhausting cleaning day quietly disappears. Hara Hachibu, the pause partway through a meal that lets your body find its own natural enough. Ikigai, the reason to wake up that gives your day's direction and your life meaning. Wabi-sabi, the freedom of finding beauty in the imperfect and letting yourself off the impossible hook of perfect. Gamen, the quiet strength to meet hard days with dignity instead of panic. Omotenashi, the care for others, offered without reward, that quietly reshapes who you are. And kintsugi, the understanding that what broke you can become the most beautiful, most valuable part of you. Notice something about all 8. Not one of them requires money. Not one of them requires more time than you already have in a day. Not one of them requires you to become a completely different person overnight, or to summon some enormous reserve of willpower you're not sure you possess. Every single one is small. That's not a weakness of these habits. It's the entire secret of them. Because this is the thing Japan seems to understand so deeply. The thread running through every idea in this video. A massive difference is never really made by a massive action. It's made by a tiny action, repeated with quiet consistency, given the patience to compound over time. The man in Kanazawa straightening his shoes for 20 seconds a night wasn't performing some grand act of self-improvement. He was simply doing one small thing every day for 30 years. And that steady, humble repetition is exactly what built a life and a home that feels calm, ordered, and cared for. You don't need all 8 of these tonight. In fact, please don't try to adopt all 8 tonight. That's the old, broken model of change we talked about at the very beginning. The all-at-once approach that always collapses. Instead, do what actually works. Choose one. Just one. The one that landed hardest as you were listening. Maybe it's the shoes at the door. Maybe it's the pause before the second helping. Maybe it's the way you've been hiding your own cracks instead of honoring them. Pick that one and practice it. Deliberately, every day for the next 7 days. That is the entire homework. One habit, 7 days. Because sometimes, changing your whole life doesn't take a whole new life. Sometimes, it takes one good habit, small enough that you can't fail at it, repeated long enough that it quietly becomes who you are. And maybe that's the deepest secret Japan has to offer. That the biggest transformations always begin with the smallest possible step. Now I genuinely want to hear from you, so tell me in the comments. Out of these 8 habits, which one is your life missing the most right now? Just give me the number 1 through 8. I read them and there's something powerful about naming it out loud. It's the first tiny step toward actually doing it. And if this shifted something in the way you see your own days, do one small act of omotenashi right now and send it to one person you care about. Someone who's always trying to change everything at once and never gives themselves any credit for the small things they already do. They might be just one tiny habit away from everything finally feeling lighter. I'll see you in the next one.